welcome to our webinar on achieving industrial data ops at scale. My name is Mark Decker. I'm the VP of Customer Success here at Litmus, and I have Dave McMorrin. Dave, you want to say hi?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Dave McMorrin, Director of Sales Engineering here at Litmus.
All right, and great to have you here, Dave. We're going to talk a lot about industrial data ops. We're going to talk about scale as well as something that I think we've both been hearing a lot with my customers and the prospective customers that you talk to on a daily basis. So,
Yep.
really looking forward to hearing what you have to say about this topic.
Yeah, as a good topic. I really want to talk about this a little bit further, explain some of the things that we see out there.
Excellent, excellent. All right, well let's get this started and fire up PowerPoint here. So first up, let's talk a bit about our agenda. So today we're going to talk about industrial data ops. So kind of give a definition, kind of what we see it to be here at Litmus. Then we're really going to get into the scale part and why that's the starting line and not an afterthought, and why that's so important. And then we'll talk a bit about the attributes of an effective scaling strategy. And then at the end, we'll have a live AMA session to take your questions and have a bit of a dialogue around the topics here. So let's get into this. First, let's start with what is industrial data operations. And Dave, let's start.
Sure.
What have you been seeing around this area?
Yeah, so DataOps basically is the same process you'd see in something like DevOps, where you're planning what you're trying to do, you develop the code, develop the architecture, develop all that, you build what you're trying to build, you test it, you release it out, you deploy it to the to all your plants, you then operate at it, you watch, and it's going to basically evolve. I mean, that's really the key, in my opinion, is the evolution of it. That it's not a just build this and you're done. It is a evolving process that you're going to get more data. You're going to add different contexts. You're going to create new solutions. So it's not a just like build it and you're done. It is a continuous improvement process. Unlike some systems that are put in very dedicated to do specific things, this is an ongoing process.
Yeah, I think what it really means too is it's the use of your data, right, to continually drive that improvement.
Right.
And because you don't know today what you're going to need tomorrow to do that, this is a journey that when you put it in an industrial data ops platform, you're not done. You've just started, and there's a lot of things to consider, right, as you go on that journey.
Right. Exactly. So it's again, you're going to learn from the journey, right? And that journey really it never ends, right? Continuous improvement. You always can get better, is the way I look at it.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, and then we also talk about the at scale part, which is what this seminar is about, or this webinar. So I'd like to talk a little bit about scale as well.
Yeah,
if
that's
that
good.
works.
Yep.
So yeah, when I'm talking to prospective customers, sometimes I'll ask them why they're talking to us, and they may have run into, hey, we have a scale issue. But one of the things I always look at is, like, what does scale mean to you?
Right.
And what do we define as scale? So I think when we define it scale, and this Mark, you can talk to this as well, is we're talking about scale from plant to plant to plant, to be able to replicate, to be able to monitor and manage at scale and all the various plants, not volume of tags or number of application scale or machine to machine scale, but more of that horizontal plant to plant scale. We can talk about the other scaling as well, but I just want to be specific about what we're talking about today.
Yeah, I think one of those things is the ability to streamline your efficiencies to manage your industrial data ops platform across your enterprise, right? So can you be nimble? Can you make change quickly? Can you be flexible? How does that look and feel? And you really have to plan for that, or else what you can wind up with is a dead end very quickly.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I also think, along the lines of the journey, that we're being, what I see is a lot of reactionary type of builds, right? Where you're starting out with one thing to start with the data, just basically getting raw data to the cloud, for example, right? And people
Right,
think they're
right.
done. That's just the beginning. I'm looking at it as like eventually they'll find out that they need more of a data model. They need more context. So then they start plugging in more pieces on it. Now now we want a UNS, so we're going to plug in another piece, and you end up with a one piece at a time type of build that I think evolves, and I think we'll talk about this further, but evolves into a, you know, 4, 5, 6 different vendors to get that stack, which works fine in a single plant, but how do I then replicate that?
Yeah, very
And
good
and
point.
yeah, and you've dealt with customers doing that. I don't know, maybe you want to talk about that or what your experience has been at scale.
Yeah, well, I have a slide for that on our next slide,
Oh, okay,
but
great.
just before we leave this one, like I think the big piece here is exactly what you said. If you look at industrial data ops as a continuous process, which it is in my mind, and I'm sure you see it exactly the same way. If you don't have that scale part, you cannot continue to do that figure eight loop. Like it does not work because you will
Right,
you will do this once and then you'll
right,
be like, you'll hit the wall. So,
right.
all right. Well,
Yeah.
let's have a look and see what it looks like when you don't think about scale. So there's the snakes and ladders chart, as we like to term it, or maybe for some of you, shoots and ladders
For the North Americans
for the
or
North
for the
Americans.
U.S. side,
The U.S.
shoots and
audience
ladders.
specifically, yes. And Dave, you start talking about this a bit, right? Where you start here at the bottom, right? Bottom right, and what's the first thing you do? You need a protocol to yank some data out of your PLCs, but then
Right.
it, take us on the journey that you see a lot.
So, yeah, so I'll see like a protocol converter. So it's just basically reading from the PLC and then converting that data into, usually a JSON packet, not to get too technical on this, but it converts it and then they're pushing it to cloud. And then over time, what happens is they realize that cloud can be expensive when you do it that way. The data scientists don't like to work with the data, so they want to add to it. And then very popular now is a UNS. So I want to push my data to a message broker to decouple the data collection from the applications being used at it. You're decoupling your ISA 95 hierarchy by doing it that way. So there's some great advantages to do that. But then they go get another company to get that. So that's what I see. The other thing is they'll start with um, a protocol converter and then realize they
Right.
don't have all the protocols. So then they up with another protocol converter, right? So now I've got two protocol converters. I've got a client that needs to be installed to send data to a broker. Then I end up with a broker, right? So I'm already looking at probably 3, 4 vendors right there. And all I've gotten, all I've done is gotten the data to a message broker in a plan. I haven't even
Yes.
used the data yet,
Well,
right?
yeah, that's a great point, right? It's you're solving the problem that's right in front of you without the vision of what you actually need,
Right,
right?
right.
And I've lived this life in my past, and I call it the local hero syndrome, which I see a lot.
Yeah.
It's kind of reinventing itself where you're tasked with a job at a single plant. So I was tasked with a job once a long time ago to get data out of the PLCs, get it into a specific format, and publish it to a central system. Sort of what people are doing these days.
Right.
And the great thing is, you go in there and you solve that problem and you do it very well, and now you are the local hero. So the plant says, well, that's great. And then word gets out, and guess what your reward is as a local hero? You
Plant
get to
two.
you get to go to the next plant. Yeah. And so like you're all pumped up, next plant, and do the same thing. And you cobble it in and it works. You've got these different pieces and they're all it's great. And that plant's like, wow, that's really good. So now you're two for two. And again, your reward is plant number three. But the fun part is now you get to plant number three, and as you go on this journey, you learn more and you realize in plant number three, you start talking to more people and it's a little bit different. And then you realize I got to make this a bit more flexible because it was very specific for the first two plants, right? So plant number three is slightly different. So I tweak it and then I realize now I've got a different answer in plant three than I do in one and two. And so what happens is you go back and you fix, you improve 1 and 2, but you've just lost out on plant 4, right? So now this is your snakes and ladders where you've gone up so high and now you're taking that snake all the way back to the beginning and you're back reinventing what you already did. And so it's the opportunity cost, and this is the scale part. You're losing out on plants 4, 5, 6 because you're going back to fix plants 1, 2, and 3. And it compounds itself as you go across more and more plants. You finally hit the wall. And I think Dave, you've heard this as well, as about plant 5 or 6, where you really hit the wall of I can't maintain this anymore. And it's just it becomes too slow and too clunky. And now plant 7, 8, 9, they're gonna start doing their own thing because they can't wait. And now you've got a
Right.
mishmash of different stacks, different everything
Right.
across the board.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it varies depending on what the customer is doing and how they're, structured internally and those kinds of things. But what I've seen, usually if you're talking about your stack where you start with that protocol converter, so we're showing on this, shoots and ladder game that start protocol converter, message broker, and heading up,
Yeah,
that you get to like 4 plants and it becomes unmanageable and not scalable, right? It's hard to repeat that and like every plant starting over. But I also see that when you start from the top, so if you pick an analytics strategy in your cloud and work down, I see the same thing. That's a little better. You get to maybe 6 or 7 plants, but it takes a long time because what ends up happening if you do it that way is that every plant is different and it's like
yes.
starting over every time. So you get to this
Yeah.
point where it takes forever. I mean, we're talking to people that have, implemented in six or seven plants out of 100, and it's taken them 5 years to get there, right? And
Yeah.
it's like, and then they're realizing it's like that was probably a mistake, like, and now they're going back and looking at a different way to do that. I what I'd
Correct.
like to do is like short circuit that, right? Like, hey, this is what's going to happen. We've seen it over and over and over again, Mark. And it's like, hey, it's almost like a warning. It's like, hey, think about this ahead of time. Think about scale when you start, right? Not as an afterthought, because I think that's what happens.
Yeah, and I think part of the problem that at least I know I ran into in the past, and I see it happening now, is again you build it once and it's great, but if you've used things like a SCADA as part of this DataOps platform, you may or may not own that SCADA or have responsibility for it. So now you have to always go to that group or team to make any changes.
Right.
The person who owns the MQTT broker may own that piece, and again, you've got to line up the changes. And but it gets even worse when part of that stack is a production system. And again, I go back to a SCADA because that change means any change in a production system typically has change control. It'll happen on a weekend during downtime, and it's a lot less agile, and rightly so because you are changing your production system. So you don't want to compromise that. It's there to run the plant. So when you start to combine the systems that run your plant with your industrial data ops strategy, it'll work, but
Hmm.
you're sacrificing again time and speed to proliferate, and hopefully your entire enterprise has the same systems in every plant, which if I was a betting man, I would say it
Yeah.
probably doesn't.
Yeah.
Right.
I
um
mean, yeah. Yeah. I mean, we just have seen it so many times where, they're building it and, um, again, it's custom code, it's protocol converters, it's a SCADA system, it's all these different pieces to get
right,
there. And then at some point, like we said, you repeat it, it becomes difficult to repeat. And then
right.
there's no day two management, there's no what happens in a year from now. I want to manage this and monitor it, and I want to update them. Like, how does that all happen?
Yeah, and
So,
I'd say it wouldn't be a year from now because, like we said in the first slides, you don't know what you need tomorrow, today, right? So
right.
tomorrow you may need something different from a data perspective. And now if you want to change that, if it's just one plant, if you're solving the issue for one plant, it's not so bad. Honestly,
No,
it's not so
no, it
bad.
works fine. Works
It
great. There's
works
some
fine.
great products out there to do that.
But if you've got a data scientist or the enterprise now says just casually, so are we calculating OEE the same across every plant? Well,
That
there you
never
go.
happens.
Right. And here's a great story. Because people always say, oh, we have standards, so we can use those standards across every plant, right? For contextualization, for ISA 90, 98, 95, whatever you want to do. We had a sales engineers in a meeting with one of our customers, and they kind of mentioned that, yeah, we have a standard. And there was people from 4 different plants, and this was a corporate standard. And nobody had heard of this corporate standard. Every plant, I guess every plant had, they all had a standard, but it was slightly different.
Right,
And in my past with big corporations, we always published the standard, and then but it didn't matter because people would just use their own thing because it was the data was meant for the plant. But
right,
now the changing element in all of this is the data is not just meant for the plant. It's meant to be brought out and shared across the enterprise. And that drives the standardization that's so important. Whereas in the past, it was, yeah, there was a standard and it's recommended and you should really do this, but each plant would tweak it because it didn't really matter that it was the same plant to plant to plant. It was more important just to have a standard. But
right,
the scale part now, when you bring that in, all those things to maintain that standard, if you've got the snakes and ladders, if you've got the build it piece by piece, the one piece at a time, it's going to be very hard to keep the standard from plant to plant because you're using things that might be already in place. So by the definition of that, those plants will already have defined something, so you can't change it because it's used in all their systems. So you need a way to work around that as well.
right. And I mean, going back to like this whole journey that people are on, and people are at different spots. Some have done nothing, some have already gone down an entire path and
Right,
are
right.
either happy with it or are realizing that it can't scale, and then they're now looking at it again and taking those learnings, like you said. I mean, it's a DataOps cycle that we're
It's
talking
a
about, right?
continuous
It's like
improvement,
your
continuous
continuous,
deployment, continuous
right,
integration. Agree.
right. And I think, we talk about this and we showed on this slide that lack of data governance. And I think that's a key thing that people are not just starting to talk about that, the data governance, right? They're going
Yes.
through and they're putting in a UNS, but it's like, okay, great, we're putting a UNS. How do I know that plant A and plant B are following the same UNS structure, right?
Right.
We've set a corporate standard. That's how we want the data. How do you enforce that, right? How do I know that the data in the payload of that UNS is meeting a standard that you have, right? So, there are some ways to do that, but just from a flexibility standpoint, if you want to build your own, you need to have that data governance, at some level, and to do that at scale,
And it, yeah,
plant to plant to plant.
and that is the biggest piece I think that people are not, they haven't encountered it yet, but it's about to bite them, I think,
Yeah,
is
I would
exactly what you
agree.
just described. It's
Yeah,
coming and it's going to be like a uh-oh kind of moment.
right, exactly.
All right. So how do you achieve this, right? What's the alternatives? Well, let's go to our next slide. This is kind of like owning the stack piece, right? So from a Litmus perspective, owning the whole stack from the communication protocol at the bottom all the way up to the top, right to the data integration of where it's going. This is the way to maintain agility and to maintain the scale.
Right,
So when you have this, it's one stack, but it has the different pieces that you're going to need. It owns it owns everything from source to destination. It allows you to use what you want to use when you need it, right? So you may not need a message broker, you may not want a data model or not see the need for it, but you're going to need it. So why not have a platform that already has all the things in it that you're going to need for one? So when you deploy the platform, you use the pieces that you're using or that you need at the time to satisfy your strategy, but then you can grow with it. And then you also can then manage from a central location. So everything is the same. It's a standard deployment that covers all the pieces in the same way, with the same rules, with the same context, and allows you to actually scale out horizontally and then manage what you've put in.
Right. Right. And if you have that, if you start with that native protocol, right, that protocol converter,
Right.
right, if you're starting there, that covers everything, then all those steps after that become easier because from a scaling standpoint, right, if I want to normalize that data as close to the data source as possible. And why do I want to do that? Is because everything after that then falls into place.
Right.
Right?
I
So if I
agree.
come up with a standard data model to begin right out of the protocol, then I don't have to worry about, I can go much quicker, instead of having to
Yes.
install more pieces and manage those like we've been talking about.
Yes.
Um,
And what this also sets you up for is change. And I'll give you a great example of, let's say you're sending data to the cloud, right? And so your IT team is currently with cloud provider A, and they negotiate a better deal with cloud provider B. Well, if you want to migrate your data over 50 plants or 100 plants and you need to change your integration and you've done it 42 different ways across those 50 plants, how long is it going to take you to change that, right?
right,
So by having the stack, you change the data integration centrally across all your plants and you're done, right?
right,
Same thing with applications. You've developed a new application, or imagine that you've changed your application and now you want to redeploy it. Well, if you can't do that from a central location and push it out to every site, you're going to be scheduling downtimes at each different site. You're going to be working with different people across the enterprise to get to, hey, can you install this app? And it becomes a nightmare, right? And so you lose all the things that you fought for, like your agility, your speed to change, your flexibility, and the people, the end users of this system, they're not very happy anymore because they can't get what they need in a timely way.
right. Well, we're back to the days of the siloed data
Right.
that change, you put a request for a change, it takes 6 months to get it done, those kinds of things. That's what happens, right? We're
Yes.
we're back to where we started almost, just using different technology.
Using different technology, exactly. So I really like the idea of a single platform. And I know some people say, well, I don't want to be locked into one platform. Well, there's a lot of people who would rather build it themselves, right? But again, it will work for one planet, maybe two, if you're really good, three
Well,
or four. But
yeah, I mean, but the other part of that is if one plant likes, I think what you need to do is you got to work on your scaling of your data through that whole stack up to the cloud for the data scientists that enterprise view. But if you have a stack that is flexible enough and agile enough that if you want to use a tool in each plant, like they prefer different dashboarding tools or they already own something, they can still use that as part of that stack, but it's almost like it's to the side of the scalable stack, right?
yeah, it
That's
plugs
more
in.
plant specific and plug in,
Exactly.
but you really need that scalable,
Pipeline.
top to, bottom to top type of platform to do that scaling and
Yeah.
keep the data governance, to keep the standards going, and be able to replicate quickly.
Yes. Yeah. Totally agree. Totally agree. All right. Well, let's see what that kind of looks like from an enterprise view. Basically, there's your Litmus Edge Manager piece, right? And it's your method to scale. So when you've got that scale in place, what you get is you get consistency across your enterprise.
Right.
So again, the name of the game is scale. Well, what does that mean? Well, it means being able to put whatever you need into those plants in a very, very fast way of doing it, right? And
Right.
very, very consistent.
Right. And one thing you in the top one here, you see the OTA, the over-the-air updates, right?
Yes,
People rarely are asking me about that, but that is a big part of the
it
scaling
is.
topic, right? Is
Yes.
like, okay, in 2 years when there's new versions, how am I going to update this stack that I built with 4 or 5 different vendors and do that? I mean, yeah, I joke, right? It's scalable, right? It just one piece at a time. You have to go
Yes.
update, and it takes forever, as opposed to having a central management layer that can say, I'm going to update these. I'm going to do all, 80 of these and hit a button and they all get updated.
Correct. Yeah, it's a powerful thing, but you don't realize how much you need that until you need it.
Yeah, right. That, and that's why this whole journey, that's why we're showing that journey where it can get ugly quickly. And you really need to think about the scale from the get-go, right? Starting with scale.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah,
I get requests to do, proof of values or proof of concepts kind of thing, try out the product, and it's always the same. Connect to this PLC, get out this data, build this data model, connect to this, send data to that kind of thing. Right. And nobody ever asks about, I want to repeat this at a second site.
right.
Right. There's tons of products. There's dozens of products, more than dozens, dozens of products to do protocol conversion and that stuff at the plant. It's the scale part that people don't think about.
Yeah, it's the question, what's next, which people don't get
Right.
into when they're building their stack. I can get data to the cloud. Don't worry. I got a SCADA system. I'll put an MQTT broker on the end of that. And where do you want it to go? Great.
Yeah.
But for a single plant, fine. When you talk your enterprise, it just gets messy very, very quickly.
Right. So if you I'm just a question for you, Mark. If you're
Yeah.
talking to, because you've been on the ground and in the trenches on this stuff. And I'm sure some CIOs are out there saying, well, my team has a standard on how to produce this and how to build this, and we're following all the methodologies we put in place. What would you say to that? What is your experience to what's really happening on the shop floor?
Well, I would say that's great. That's super important. But what happens is when you start to hit the different plants, you're going to find that they have things that are already in place, right?
Hmm.
So now let's say you bring in your own MQTT broker and they already have one. Which one are you going to use? You're
Right.
going to buy two, maybe. But it comes down to, even if you have your own stack and it's beautiful and it's perfect, it works from source to destination, you have to manage that. And it's inherently more difficult to manage 4 or 5 components working together than it is
Exponentially harder. Right.
exponentially harder than it is to manage a single platform that does the same thing, in
Right.
essence, right?
Right.
So yes, you'll get to plant one, and you'll get to plant two, and you'll get to plant three, and then plant four will throw you for a loop. And then you realize that I probably have to make something a little bit better in plant one or two. And again, like I said, you'll go back and you'll start fixing instead of scaling. And
Right.
then the change will come again because you don't know what's going to be asked of your stack tomorrow. And if you have to keep adding pieces and keep building it and going to the top and going back to the bottom, you lose the scale, you lose the momentum. And when you lose momentum, projects and initiatives die,
Right. Yeah.
right?
Yeah. And I think what's happening also is that, there may not be an incentive, there may not be an enterprise plan or strategy, but each plant is kind of doing their own thing already.
They are
Like
guaranteed they are.
yeah, I mean, almost everyone I'm talking to, they're going in and they've already started down a journey, which you and I have seen many times. And they're at different spaces in it, but we can see where they're gonna, where it's gonna, run into a roadblock from scaling and management. We see it all
Yeah,
the time.
yeah, what will happen is you will get 50 individual plants doing their own thing because they will
Hmm.
they will go at different paces and they will use different pieces. And you may get the data, but then you will have no control over what data you're getting. And
Right.
in an enterprise environment where the data is meant to be looked at across the enterprise, you need to own the stack if you want to get the results that you're looking for. If you don't own certain pieces, you're always going to be fighting, you're always going to be coercing, you're always going to have to be asking for, when can I get this data? And just managing 50 requests across 50 plants, that's a full-time job, just to manage
Oh
who's
yeah.
who's done what they're supposed to do, right? it
That's a
it
full-time
gets
job with overtime is what that is.
it gets difficult, right? So did it for a while, it wasn't fun. But that's where you can land into. So,
Right.
but so I think we've covered a lot here. If there's questions but really for anybody who has an industrial data platform project, my advice is check with your team on how you're planning to scale that solution, right? So just ask the question, how does this scale? And it's not like Dave, you talked about earlier, it's not about so much how many devices and how much data I can get at a plant. It's how do I manage across the horizontal, across all the different plants,
Right,
right?
the whole enterprise,
The
right?
whole
Exactly.
enterprise, right? And then we also have an entire executive briefing on this topic. So again, please contact us, and we'll be happy to talk more with you. Well, Dave and I can talk about this stuff all day. We've
For
seen it.
sure.
It's super interesting to me because I've lived it. So I'm more curious too, just to know where people are in their journey, so I can we can at least give
Right.
some advice or share some stories and see where people are.
Yeah, and even if you've already made a decision on some things, give us a call. We'd be happy to talk about the management at scale, as well. Just wherever you are in your journey, be happy to
Yeah,
discuss it.
perfect. And then you can raise some of the questions during our AMA session as well. So happy to chit chat during this webinar too.
Sure,
So
we'll continue the discussion and answer some questions.
awesome. All right, well,
Great.
let's get into that, and we'll start taking questions.
Thanks.